founding era, 1983 to 1993. The citizen action organizations were an innovative response to the splintering of the left after the bitter disappointments of the late 1960s. They were a strategic response to the rising tide of pro-corporate policies reshaping both major political parties.
The entire society was facing a squeeze where there had been an expanding middle class, there had been expanding, decreasing inequality with the Great Society programs and with the civil rights movement. And all of that started to fracture. So we started to spearhead the concept of multi-issue and multi-constituency organizations across racial lines, across economic lines, across geographic lines. Farmers are organizing along with people from cities.
The Reagan election was a clarion call to progressives that we really had to dig down deep and organize far more broadly. At that point, we were just experimenting with elections.
Dick Presser of the Machinists Union drove the strategy to create a citizen action group for Wisconsin and led the board for the first decade.
It was on Richard Presser's broad shoulders that the coalition was built. He was the directing business representative for District 10, which included pretty much all of southeastern Wisconsin for the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers.
Presser was a working class hero. He'd come out of the Lattice Company, building forges, ultimately rising to the president there, and then eventually becoming the lead machinist in the state of Wisconsin. But even when we were working with him, I was over at his house once. He opened up a closet and showed me he still had his work boots and his work clothes laid out, and that if it came to that, he was going to go back to work. He never did.
From the outset, citizen action was based on a revolutionary model for social change.
I would call these the greatest days of my life. It was so fulfilling because it was so hopeful about how we can create social change and build towards the future.
Citizen Action of Wisconsin was one of the most vital and clear-thinking and exciting organizations.
An organization engaged in statewide, multi-issue, and multiracial organizing that also directly intervened in elections was a radical innovation at the time. Before citizen action was created, organized labor and the other movements of the left did not work together in Wisconsin. The progressive labor leaders who drove citizen action in its founding era sought to change that.
This was a very unique, historically unique organization in that it brought together all of the labor unions, most of the main labor unions, I should say, that were joined by neighborhood organizations, church groups, Wisconsin Conference of Churches, Council on Urban Life, and so forth, and senior citizen organizations. And they were all attracted to being part of the coalition with the opportunity to work with organized labor, which hadn't happened before. So organized labor was the nucleus of this effort at this time.
Citizen action from its inception was uniquely member-centered.
The fundraising was a challenge, and there were odd benefits to it. It meant that the members really owned the organizations pretty deeply.
Citizen Action's statewide canvas reached tens of thousands of Wisconsinites each month, dramatically extending the influence of progressive organizing on issues and elections.
The ability to address politics and to communicate directly with our members on political candidates was really an extraordinary political breakthrough in the community organizing world. And it really began to make a difference. With the door-to-door canvas, as one of our critical organizing arms, we were able to reach hundreds and thousands of families in a week.
It inspires people just to have someone on their porch with enthusiasm, earnestly talking about these issues and candidates, and doing citizen education and encouraging them to be participants in the political system.
It was novel to organize on many different issues. It was also new to seek majority support for policies that benefited both the middle and working class, with a special focus on benefiting low-income and marginalized communities.
We had a special, what can I say, a bias towards serving those who needed help most. African American communities, Hispanic communities, and unemployed workers across the state.
It's always been built on some of the same core principles, really putting justice and love at the center of our politics, really believing that we can build a multiracial coalition.
We built unemployed consuls and recruited unemployed people. They became members. There was no charge. And we were able to negotiate discounts at grocery stores for people who were our members. The first issue that we really won on was a moratorium on mortgage foreclosures. Hundreds of Wisconsin families were losing their homes during the economic downturn. Many of them were unemployed or, reduced income. And we were able to win one of the first foreclosure moratoriums in the country. And I remember very well the ceremony in the office with Tommy Thompson grimacing as he signed the documents.
One historically important effort was the campaign to force Wisconsin to divest from South African apartheid. This was driven by board member Martha Love in the mid-1980s. Martha serves to this day as the vice president of Citizen Action Education Fund Board. In 1986, Citizen Action made a huge splash in Wisconsin elections, playing an unprecedented role for a nonprofit in a major U.S. Senate race. Using its statewide canvas, Citizen Action helped progressive challenger Ed Garvey narrowly miss defeating notorious right-wing incumbent Robert Caston. During the epic battle, Citizen Action canvassers had 130,000 conversations with voters, persuading nearly 40% of undecided voters to support Garvey. It was estimated at the time that Citizen Action contributed an astounding 2% of Garvey's total vote. But as it is with all progressive advances, there was a punishing counterattack by Senate Republicans who filed the most sweeping election complaint in history to this time, draining Citizen Action of both time and precious resources for many years.
The complaint was just a massive, massive attack on our organization. And yet we were able to stay the course. We were able to defend ourselves. And despite the McCarthyite tactics that, for example, brought some of our leaders like Heather Booth literally to the halls of Congress to testify against before antagonistic committees that used McCarthyite tactics against them, we were able to persevere and ultimately succeed. And there has never been another complaint filed with the same level of expanse and with such a massive assault.
The Middle Era, 1994 to 2009. The pioneering leadership of Dick Presser and executive directors Dan Kamerer and Tammy Odell early on, and Jeff Egan for nearly a decade, gave way to new leadership. It took courage, to step into the shoes of the founding generation.
Dick Presser was, along with Jeff Egan, the person who really convinced me that I had to take the job and agreed to back me 110%. But anyway, I went for it.
The tradition of board leadership from formidable and progressive labor leaders continued with Bruce Coburn, David Newby, Jim Kavanaugh, Sheila Cochran, and Guy Costello. The organization evolved its model and built to higher levels of influence under the direction of executive directors Larry March, Bob Hudak, and later Linda Hunold. In the 1990s, some of the big issues that Citizen Action worked on have receded into history. These included passing the first ever local lead paint disclosure and removal ordinance in Milwaukee, and the controversies over bovine growth hormone and the Exxon Crandon mine.
One of my favorites was our campaign against bovine growth hormone, BGH. Monsanto and their allies in the dairy industry were trying to force Wisconsin farmers to begin to use their products to put cows literally on crack, to speed up their biological processes to produce more milk. And the results at the doors were phenomenal. We raised more money, we got more members, we got more signatures, and very quickly, grocery stores around Wisconsin began to take out ads and to put signs in their windows saying no BGH milk here. And we were able to pass that moratorium. And it was an extraordinary grassroots effort. Now, I want to be clear, the farmers led the way, but the consumers were absolutely, it was their reaction that really cinched the victory.
In the 90s, we took Exxon on with their various tentacle arms of wanting to build a hard rock acid sulfide mine at the headwaters of the Wolf River, and we beat them.
I first became aware of Citizen Action in the late 1980s as a law student at the University of Wisconsin, and as somebody who was running for local office, the Dane County Board of Supervisors. There was an active Citizen Action group on campus, and I knew they were working on issues that I was working on also as a local elected official. By the time I was elected to the state legislature, I had had many other interactions with Citizen Action and the work that was being done around three critical issues: abating lead paint, which was a very much a Milwaukee-focused project, fighting the proposed Crandon mine in northwest Wisconsin, and fighting for comprehensive healthcare reform, a plan that would be one that left no one out and that everyone could afford, a single payer plan to be specific.
Citizen Action continued to take strong stands on issues before they were popular. One example was gay marriage.
One was whether or not we were going to stand for domestic partnerships, or should we, stand for gay marriage. And as I looked in that room, I knew we had gay and lesbian members sitting at the table who were members of our board. And I don't think our directors were ready for it, because it wasn't something that we had necessarily discussed at length prior to. Our directors were looking at funding, and we had funding from religious organizations at the time. And they said, we might lose money. I said, well, I can't remember my words exactly, but on that day, we pushed forward and we codified that we were pro-gay marriage.
There was a key time period when I got elected to the state legislature, I believe it was 98, where, I had the opportunity to start working with Wisconsin Citizen Action. And what was so important about doing that for me was to have a coalition of groups that had common values. Having that big table of groups to help get something across the finish line just meant everything for someone who served as elected official. We needed that inside-outside efforts, and it was the outside efforts from Citizen Action.
As Citizen Action entered the new century, it continued to deploy its paid canvas to help elect progressive candidates. It also built even greater electoral sophistication.
We did a lot of candidate recruitment. We had a pretty aggressive electoral training program, and then we did direct kind of electoral work through our members. We ran some of the really, really large get out the vote efforts, especially in Milwaukee.
The modern era, 2009 to present. Citizen Action's model changed dramatically in 2009 when the financial crisis sparked by greed and the big banks and their political enablers made the paid canvas financially unsustainable, such as the organizing co-op and innovative new uses of news coverage and social media to augment its organizing. The era also brought another changing of the guard in leadership. Two strong board presidents, Wisconsin AFL-CIO President Stephanie Bloomingdale and attorney Mark Thompson, have provided firm stewardship for over a decade. Robert Craig, hired in 2009 during the worst part of the financial crisis, is now Citizen Action's longest-serving executive director. Citizen Action's role in healthcare dramatically grew during the first decade of the 21st century, building a national reputation as one of the leading state healthcare reform groups.
To be a part of Citizen Action's board leadership at that time, when my passion was healthcare reform and getting a universal single payer plan in place, was such an honor.
Citizen Action has stood for healthcare as a right from the beginning and fought all of the fights along the way to achieving that end. At first, the first decade of our life, it was one of many issues, though we fought and unfortunately lost huge fights over deregulation of the hospital industry here in Wisconsin, which has had continuing consequences. We need to win that fight moving forward. We were heavily involved in the big national healthcare reform fight before the Affordable Care Act, the fight over the Clinton healthcare plan. And in the state level, ultimately we built a statewide base and a movement which was part of with senior groups passing senior care, the only public option that exists under Medicare Part D, where the government sets the price of prescription drugs, not the pharmaceutical industry. We then built even higher levels in the 21st century and were part with a 50-member coalition we constructed, 50 different organizations, and the AFL-CIO and organized labor at the center of it, in developing and passing the only fully funded single-payer style plan to ever pass any legislative body in the United States, and that was the state Senate in 2007, Healthy Wisconsin. It did not become law, but it held up the state budget for 4 months and was a high watermark for the state Medicare for All movement. We then pivoted to the epic battles over the Affordable Care Act. We were the Wisconsin lead for Healthcare America Now, the biggest national grassroots progressive campaign in American history. And we and our colleagues across the country beat back the Tea Party rebellion and were able to pass finally the Affordable Care Act. Then it was years of defending it, both by the subversion of Scott Walker and sabotage, such as not taking the Medicaid expansion money, which is an ongoing fight, and attacks at the federal level. And finally, the crescendo of protecting the Affordable Care Act, the Donald Trump era after 2016, where most people, national experts, thought they were going to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And there was a huge popular resistance. We led the fight in Wisconsin, and they failed to do that, finally securing the future of the Affordable Care Act. We also, in that period afterwards, developed one of the best state-based healthcare reform plans in the country, the Badge Care Public Option, which would double eligibility for public health coverage in this state and open up our Badge Care state, a public program that sets the price, the fair price of healthcare to individuals and to small businesses. And Citizen Action will never rest until we take control of healthcare back from the medical industrial complex and guarantee healthcare as a right where everyone gets the care they need, no matter what.
Our branded healthcare campaign came out of brainstorming from our lead staff people and having the mascot be the Citizen Action cow, which became kind of ubiquitous around the state. People knew what it was, and it was, I don't even remember who sewed the costume, but it was a pretty attractive looking cow with a sign that said "Got Healthcare."
In the modern era, Citizen Action also built a major digital media program to supplement its organizing and earned media. This includes building a major social media following and a popular weekly podcast. Battleground Wisconsin podcast has now been in production for 13 years and has a statewide audience of members, supporters, and many elected officials. Citizen Action also reaches a statewide audience through regular appearances on progressive radio, including the popular Earl Ingram Show on Civic Media Radio Network. During the Walker years, as it gradually rebuilt capacity after the financial crisis of 2009, Citizen Action used news media and well-timed protests to expose some of the worst abuses of the period. These protest campaigns kept members involved and attracted new members to the organization. Citizen Action's merger with Good Jobs and Livable Neighborhoods, a group specializing in accountable economic development policy, brought a new issue area, which it exploited in the Walker years. This began with Walker's outrageous decision to cancel an already funded high-speed rail project funded by President Obama, which shuttered a major new factory built in the heart of Milwaukee's African-American community. Citizen Action led opposition to the abuses of Walker's privatized jobs agency, WEDAC, and one of the worst economic boondoggles in American history, the infamous Foxconn project. Citizen Action also was a leader in challenging Walker's attacks on voting rights as a lead plaintiff in a federal lawsuit which overturned several voter disenfranchisement laws. The most important innovation of the modern era was the invention of the organizing co-op, a model of regional member co-ownership which continues to draw national attention. The new model helped replace the loss of the paid fundraising canvas, the primary tool of member outreach for the first 25 years. The organizing co-ops built member power in 5 key strategic regions of Wisconsin. Regional organizing co-ops have given Citizen Action a vehicle for new direct public persuasion models, especially the deep canvas, which brings organizing techniques to electoral politics and grassroots lobbying campaigns. Following the Walker years, Citizen Action made another major strategic innovation, reinventing its economic justice work by combining it with the existential threat of runaway climate change. Citizen Action focused on local climate and equity planning, especially in Milwaukee, where it has transformed the policies of the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee Public Schools.
January 2019, I'll never forget that day. It's Robert Craig and Raphael Smith from Citizen Action, myself as a county supervisor, and we met with Ashanti Hamilton, who was then the president of the Milwaukee Common Council. And we had this great meeting where we talked about jobs, we talked about climate, we talked about the effects in the city of Milwaukee. And to his credit, Ashanti said, why don't we create the city-county task force on climate and economic equity? We thought, great, it was either the best thing in the world or something he would do just to pass the time. But he really wanted to do the work, and we were happy about that. And so we had about 10 different organizations come together, and we met biweekly, and our work product was the climate and equity plan at the city of Milwaukee that Mayor Cavalier Johnson signed into law last year, which is perfect because at that same time, President Biden got passed the largest investment in climate and economic equity in the history of this country. So now we need to take our blueprint and get as much of the federal dollars as possible so that we can implement this plan for the city of Milwaukee and the state of Wisconsin.
Pushing the envelope and reaching for the stars has always been the DNA of Citizen Action of Wisconsin. Bold vision and a willingness to extend ourselves to the limit is necessary now more than ever.
Our reach always exceeded our grasp. We were always trying to do more. And on occasion, we succeeded. We were able to grow. We were able to build. And then there were points where, in many cases through no fault of our own, we just did not have the resources.
It speaks to the boldness of the organization taking stances that people may not always see as either popular or stances that people may not always see as the right one to take, but more often than not, Citizen Action has been on the right side of those. Oftentimes, what is seen as controversial positions to take. And I'm incredibly grateful. We have to mix it up. We can't just do things the way they've always been done for the sake of doing things the way they've always been done. And pushing the envelope is something that this organization does best. And we're going to continue to push more envelopes together.
Well, we now are on a knife's edge between freedom and authoritarian rule. And whether it's the freedom to vote, the freedom for reproductive freedom, the freedom to thrive, or an authoritarianism that's hate-filled, often violence-prone, and really is a pushback on so many of the victories we have won.
We are proud to stand on the shoulders of giants. They're heirs to a great organizing tradition. It is up to us now, and whether we will make the level of commitment required by the challenges of our times.
Some people confuse politics as self-expression, and that's not it at all. Politics is about making a difference in people's lives, and it's about organizing collective response and collective power.
I would like to say further that to everyone that's attending, I am so humbly honored and completely inspired by your continuing vision and your energy to move forward with an effort to provide true democracy that's rooted in economic, social, and racial and environmental justice and equity.